When people think of the crisis in California, the imagery is almost always the same: car break-ins in San Francisco or the sprawling encampments of Los Angeles. Yet, by focusing solely on these coastal hubs, the nation is missing the actual epicenter of the battle. Far from the tech campuses and beachside real estate, a fiercer, more intense struggle is waging in the sprawling expanse of the Central Valley. Cities here are facing rates of violence and concentrated economic desperation that dwarf those of their larger coastal neighbors. These are communities fighting for survival, while the media spotlights look elsewhere. This is the story of California's forgotten frontlines: Stockton and Bakersfield. California exists as a state of mind-bending contradictions, a duality that is difficult for outsiders to fully grasp. It is the world's fifth-largest economy, a land characterized by unimaginable technological wealth, stunning coastal beauty, and immense cultural influence. Yet, drive just an hour or two inland, away from the cooling Pacific breeze, and into the vast agricultural heartland of the Central Valley, and the Golden State narrative dissolves into a much harsher, grittier reality. In this region, the crisis isn't just about the famously high cost of rent or high-profile retail theft. It is a visceral, daily struggle against entrenched violent crime and deep-rooted economic stagnation. While national media outlets obsess over the highly visible homelessness crises in San Francisco or the sheer volume of people struggling in Los Angeles County, they frequently overlook the intense, concentrated crises happening in mid-sized interior cities. These cities lack the immense tax bases, the philanthropic resources, and the national spotlight of their coastal counterparts, leaving them to fend for themselves against overwhelming odds. Today, we must turn that spotlight onto the two cities that most starkly define this inland struggle. To truly understand why Stockton and Bakersfield are the vital front lines of this issue, one must move past total raw numbers and instead look at intensity, specifically the rate of reported crime per capita. Los Angeles, by virtue of its massive population of nearly 4 million people within city limits, will always have the highest total incidence of crime in the state. But when examining the statistical likelihood of a resident encountering violence in their daily life, the map of California shifts dramatically. Recent data reporting crime rates per 1,000 residents clarifies this distinction sharply. While a wealthy, major hub like San Diego sits at a relatively low violent crime rate of 9.12 per 1,000 residents, and even San Francisco, despite its reputation for disorder, hovers around a violent crime rate of 10.1, the Central Valley tells a vastly different and more alarming story. Bakersfield roughly doubles those coastal numbers, sitting near a rate of 14.0. But Stockton resides in a different stratosphere entirely, recording a staggering violent crime rate of 19.96 per 1,000 residents. This is not a minor statistical deviation. It represents a fundamental, terrifying difference in public safety and the lived experience of the community. Let's focus first on Stockton. Situated in San Joaquin County and serving as a major inland port, Stockton has long carried a reputation for grit and resilience. However, the cold, hard data paints a picture of a city currently under immense, sustained pressure. With that violent crime rate hovering near 21 per 1,000 people, residents face a threat level that is multiples higher than the national average. It is an environment where aggravated assaults and robberies are depressingly common. Furthermore, it is not just violence that plagues the city. Property crime is also rampant, clocking in at a rate of 49.62 per 1,000 residents, significantly higher than Los Angeles' rate of approximately 18.84. But crime does not exist in a vacuum. It thrives on instability, and Stockton's instability is visibly manifested in its profound housing crisis. The 2024 point-in-time count for the region showed nearly 27,000 homeless individuals, with Stockton accounting for the vast majority of that population. The most alarming statistic, however, is not the total number, but the nature of that homelessness. An astounding 81.8% of Stockton's homeless population is unsheltered, living on the streets, in parks, along riverbanks, or in vehicles. This is one of the highest rates of unsheltered existence in the entire country. When 4 out of 5 homeless individuals have no access to a shelter bed, it creates an environment of absolute desperation that inevitably feeds into the cycle of crime, both as perpetrators driven by survival and as deeply vulnerable victims of predation. Further south in the San Joaquin Valley lies Bakersfield, often characterized by its deep economic ties to agriculture and oil production. Bakersfield mirrors Stockton's challenges, but with its own distinct dynamics. While its violent crime rate of approximately 13.0 per 1,000 is slightly lower than Stockton's, it still represents a profound crisis of public safety compared to state and national norms. Property crime is similarly high in this desert city, hovering around 42 per 1,000 residents. Like Stockton, Bakersfield faces a severe housing emergency that compounds every other social issue it faces. The most recent full data sets indicate Kern County has over 32,000 homeless individuals, and like its northern neighbor, the lack of infrastructure is glaring. A critical 70.2% of this population is unsheltered in the intense, often punishing heat of the valley desert. This lack of basic shelter is a humanitarian crisis that spills over into public spaces, creating constant friction, visible despair, and an environment where the rule of law feels fragile. The high rates of unsheltered homelessness in both these cities are not just social tragedies. They are accelerants for the types of street-level crises that show up in crime statistics. The crucial question remains, why are these specific cities the front lines? Why here, rather than the Tenderloin in San Francisco or Skid Row in LA? The answer lies in the devastating economic gap between California's notorious cost of living and the actual earnings available in the Central Valley. This is where the data becomes undeniable and paints a clear picture of structural disadvantage. When we look at a wealthy coastal city like San Jose, the heart of Silicon Valley, we see a median household income of over $141,000. Even with extremely high housing costs, that level of income provides a significant buffer against absolute poverty for many. It is no coincidence that San Jose's violent crime rate is comparatively low at 6.07 per 1,000. Now contrast that wealth with the interior reality. Stockton holds a median household income of just over $77,000, and Bakersfield sits similarly around $80,000. These cities have household incomes that are barely half that of the Silicon Valley hubs, yet their residents still face California-level expenses for gasoline, food, utilities, and increasingly rent. This economic pressure cooker is the primary driver of the crisis. When a community has concentrated poverty, where median incomes are dramatically low versus the state average and economic opportunity feels scarce, violent crime is almost always a trailing indicator. The poverty rate data reinforces this. While San Jose sits at an 8% poverty rate, a major valley hub like nearby Fresno handles a county median income of only around $75,000, indicating much deeper pockets of economic distress throughout the region. Coastal cities often deal with high-value property crime driven by extreme wealth inequality, the haves and have-nots living block by block. Stockton and Bakersfield, however, are dealing with violent crime driven by raw economic desperation, survival instincts, and a lack of a safety net. The high percentages of unsheltered homeless populations in Stockton, 81.8%, and Bakersfield, 70.2%, are direct consequences of this economic reality. When people fall through the cracks here, there's often nowhere to land but the street. The prevailing narrative of California in the national consciousness requires a significant adjustment. It is easy for commentators and policymakers to focus on the shoplifting epidemics in high-end retail districts or the visible encampments in major tourist centers because they are shocking symbols of a flawed paradise. But the hardest, deadliest battles are being fought in places like Stockton and Bakersfield, where the cameras rarely go. These cities are dealing with per capita rates of violence that would paralyze other communities, compounded by unsheltered homelessness rates that are among the highest in the developed world. They are fighting these battles with fewer tax dollars, less philanthropic support, and scant national attention compared to their powerful coastal neighbors. Recognizing Stockton and Bakersfield not merely as outliers, but as the forgotten front lines of the state's deepest challenges, is the first step toward acknowledging the true depth of California's socioeconomic crisis. Until the reality of the Central Valley is addressed with the same urgency and resource allocation as the issues on the coast, The Golden State will remain a tale of two vastly different, unequal, and increasingly dangerous realities.